How's it going, guys? Today we're gonna make some hand-built slab textured mugs. This is one of my most enjoyable things that I make. I find it very relaxing and meditative. It's a slow process, but if you love the process, this is really the best part. I love making something that's functional. This particular mug I literally use at least once a week. It's big. It holds 12 ounces of coffee plus cream, which is the way I consume my caffeine. So it's got coffee in it right now. It tastes great, and I'm going to show you how I make it. A couple things to get started. You're going to need a couple slabs that I've got rolled out here. One is going to be the rectangle for the main part of the mug, and then the other is going to be the base. So you can kind of eyeball your dimensions. We will get into doing the math on that, but if you're rolling your slabs, just roll them extra big and we can cut them to size. Additionally, you're gonna need a ruler. I have my phone, a pen, and some paper for the math. I've got a needle tool for cutting my slabs and slipping and scoring. I've got a thing of slip. I've got a paintbrush for slip if I need it, or I could just use my fingers. I've got a couple different things for texture. I've got this weird rolly thing that I think is for making gnocchi or something. Got one of my roller balls also for texture. That should be all you need. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so my slabs are rolled out and they're drying right now. I don't want them to be too dry, and it looks like I got a few little crusties on this one, so I'll just smooth that out a little bit. The first thing I'm gonna do is make myself a handle, and if you look at my little sample mug here, this handle is actually pulled, and in a future video we're going to show you guys how to pull a handle, and if you know how to do that, that's fine. But for this video I'm going to go ahead and do a faux pulled handle because it's much easier and much less messy and much less creepy to look at. I'm going to set my slabs aside, which is good because I want them to dry to a really soft leather hard before I start working with them. I want them to be soft leather hard because I'm going to be bending them, and if they get too firm before I bend them into a round shape, they'll crack. So I don't want them to get too dry, but I want them to be firm enough to not show any like fingerprints and impressions and stuff or fall apart. So again, I rolled them about 10 minutes ago, and I'm going to want them to sit for about 20-30 minutes before I start working with them. Handle, additionally, the reason I'm doing that first is because I want that to dry as well. I'm going to make it very wet, and then I'm going to let it dry. Before it gets too hard, I'm going to bend it to give it its shape, because again, I don't want to bend it when it's too dry, but I do want it to be pretty firm before I attach it, so that it doesn't lose its shape when I stick it on there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some clay from my bag here, just a little bit. When I make mugs, even though I'm making them large, I like to try to make the walls and the handles as dainty as possible. You may not believe that looking at this thing, but I always find that I never make a mug too thin. So I like to try to make them as thin as I possibly can. So I'm going to go ahead and get a coil going here. Roll this thing out. I like to roll from the center out. I like to use primarily my fingers and not my hands when I roll coils. I find when I just use my fingers, I don't get that weird oblong thing that just starts folding back and forth, even though I am starting to get that right now. That's okay, since this is going to be a handle, it's going to be oblong eventually anyway, so I'll just roll with the oblong, pun intended. Once I get it kind of the shape I want, I'm going to flatten it out, to give it that handle look. You'll see that if you're tapping it like this, you're getting fingerprints all over it, and the signature of a pulled handle is no fingerprints. So to get rid of that, I'm going to take a pretty wet sponge and just come back and forth across this. And that's going to give it that pulled handle look. I'm even going to rub my fingertip into the center of that to give it that pulled handle indentation. I could do that with the sponge too. I can flip that over, sponge the other side. I'm not going to give it that indentation on this side because this will be the back of the handle. I am trying to wrap this sponge around the sides to get there too. Just give it a final. Now again, I'm going to want that to dry a little bit before I bend it. Hang that right here on the side of my shelf to dry. Okay, back to my slabs. And let's do a little bit of math now. My mug here, again, it's quite big. You can make a mug any size you want. I recommend finding some mug that you like and measuring that and sizing up from there. The clay that I'm using, this is a Cone 5 B mixed with grog from Laguna, and it has a 12% shrinkage rate. So I'm going to go and get my target dimensions off of this. I'll be using centimeters since centimeters and math go together like peas and carrots. And my diameter here is 9.5, and my height is 12 centimeters. I'm going to divide both of those dimensions by 0.88. Since I have a 12% shrinkage, it's going to be 88% I'm dividing by. The height is now going to be 13.63, and the diameter is going to be 10.79, 10.8. So that means that for this rectangle that is going to become my outside wall of my mug, it needs to be 13.63 centimeters long, or tall, I guess, and then the diameter needs to be 10.8, and that means that the length, which is actually the circumference of this, is going to be pi times the diameter. So the diameter is 10.8 times 3.14159 equals 33.9 centimeters, which means that my length of my rectangle is going to be 33.9 centimeters. I'll add about half a centimeter to that for some overlap. And then I'm actually going to subtract about half a centimeter from the height for the base. So my overall height on my rectangle is going to be 13.1 roughly now. And my length is going to be about 34.5 centimeters. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I've got enough here for that. 13.1 will fit nicely all the way to the top there. And then about 34, that's tight, but I will make that work. Just going to give some rough kind of guidelines here on this slab with the side of my ruler. So it's a majority of my slab. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put some texture on here. I'm shooting for this, so basically I'm just going to roll this down here once, twice, and sideways a few times. I might try to roll this alongside my ruler. I don't know if that'll work, but I'll give it a go. I don't think I dare try that again. Just going to space up here and roll one more time. I think that's better, just freehand, like that. I'm going to turn my slab and give it some cross section. You can literally use anything around your house for your texture. It can be flowers pressed in there, anything that has any sort of design. I tried to use some cat paws on the other side of this, but the cat was not in the mood for that, so that didn't work out so well. But maybe you have a more docile cat. So that's a nice texture there. And then I'm going to put a little texture on the bottom of my mug. If this wasn't full of coffee, I'd show you. But I like a little texture on the bottom because I don't like a cup that sits flat on my table. I like to have a little bit of like recessed area, so I think it just helps it to sit more flat and causes it to like scratch less. And sometimes a super flat mug will suction to your surface and not pick up weird. So I'm just going to take my little roller ball here with some triangles on it and roll a little texture for the bottom of my mug. I wish I could tell you who makes these roller balls, but I just picked them up at Insica one year, a conference for ceramics, and don't know who made them, but I appreciate them. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut my slab. I am going to use my needle tool, And I'm going to do it on my fabric surface. So I'm going to be very careful because this needle tool can very easily cut this fabric, and then I'm going to have to redo my board. So I'm just going to be very gentle. I might not even go all the way through on my slab. And again, I'm tight on my slab on my 13.1. Go as high as possible here and come across 13.1. And then I'll cut my bottom piece. And that's going to be 34. And then if I was serious, I'd get something with a right angle out, but I'm not. But I'm just going to come across here, 13 centimeters. And then I'll come up. Beautiful. You can see the consistency of this. It's still very soft. Okay. This is the texture though that I want to be folding it in, because I don't want there to be any cracking. Actually, I do have a little bit of cracking already on the exterior, just from sitting on this board and moisture being sucked in. So I'm going to get that nice and wet with my sponge. To prevent that in the future, I could put a little bit of plastic under this while it's drying, so that my outside, or I guess this is my inside, doesn't dry out too much. I want to be very gentle here because I don't want to be messing up my texture on the other side. But I do want to make sure I get all this cracking out of here. Okay, now I'm going to stand this up, trying not to stretch it, and trying not to touch it even, so I don't want my fingers to mess it up. And I'm going to wrap it around in a circle. And it looks enormous, but I'm going to trust my math. Now we're at about 11, which is fine, and 13, which is also fine. And that is going to be our mug. I'm going to let this sit for about 10 or 15 minutes and firm up. Okay guys, this has firmed up some, not a lot because I'm pretty impatient, but I'm going to go ahead and put this seam together over here. Generally, I leave the seam pretty visible. Some people like that, some people like to see the process in their finished work, some people don't. I'm going to go ahead, I think you can imagine how to do it visible, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it not visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle on the edge of this slab. I'm going to go ahead and cut down here 45 degrees all the way. I'll take this piece off. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Try to cut down at a 45-degree angle. If I was smart, I would have just cut my slabs like that initially. So now I've got two nice 45s. I'm going to go ahead and score those. You can see, and that's a lot softer than I want it to be, but it's okay. To be honest, with clay this soft, sometimes I'll even skip scoring and slipping, but I tend to have a reputation as the bad boy of pottery. Got a little slip here. Too much, because again, this clay is pretty soft. Shouldn't have too much trouble adhering here. I'm just going to go ahead and stick that together. Even though this is 45, I'm not going to go ahead and just stick it straight together. I'm still going to overlap it a little bit offset, like you can see my finger still like a hair offset, so that I can have a little extra clay on both the front and the back to push in and smear that in. And I'm progressively going up and down, pushing a little bit harder as I go. I've got my texture. I don't want to push on my texture. I'm going to a little bit. I'm just trying to stay on this one piece of the texture. I am going to put my handle over this, so it's not a terrible problem if I do. What I'm doing on the outside, I'm doing the opposite on the inside. So I'm pushing a little bit this way on this side, on the outside, and a little bit this way on the inside. All the way up, and all the way down. Now, I don't recommend picking this up, but I do want you to see what I've got going on the inside there. You still have a little bit of a seam. And obviously, you can see what's going on the outside there. Still a little bit of a seam. I'm actually going to take the back of my paintbrush and just gently come up that seam on the inside. And then maybe even take my sponge, smooth it out on the inside. You could use a wooden tool here as well, a wooden knife if you have one. Just going up and down on the inside there, trying to smooth it out. And now I'll work the outside a little bit. You can use my paintbrush here, try to match the texture a little bit. I'm pretty happy with that for rough work. I'm going to round this out again, top and bottom. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to work on my base. So again, this texture I made here is going to be the bottom. So I'm going to flip this over. And you can see I was trying to put some cat paws there. So it's covered with cat hair and some weird texture, which glaze should fill in, so that's fine. The cat hair will burn away. Take the large particles out. Go ahead and set my mug directly on my base. And if you want a little foot around the outside, you can cut maybe 1/8 of an inch around the outside. Again, I find that foot to be the rustic look and to leave the process in there. If you want it to be clean, you can cut a little bit closer. I would leave a 1/16 because the same way that we left that 45 to overlap to give a nice clean edge, we are going to need a little extra material there. I get this base as round as possible before I start cutting. And I'm just going to go ahead and start cutting. I'm going to go close, 1/16. If you have a banding wheel or Lazy Susan, this is a good time to get it out. You want to be careful when you're cutting slabs with the angle of your cutting tool. Oftentimes you'll reach around like this to cut something and your angle's off and now you're cutting at a 45 and don't realize it. You want to make sure that wherever you're cutting, you're going perpendicular, 90-degree angle from the board that you're cutting on. Unless of course you're trying to cut a 45. Turn my board. Right. I like to put these scraps in the bag, not let them sit out too long so they don't get too dry, and I can re-moisten them and reuse them pretty easily. So now I've cut my base. It's stuck. I do want to take it off though, because I do want to slip and score it, because that's the kind of guy I am. Flip this over. Go ahead and score this all the way around. So much for being a bad boy. I've heard that being a bad boy is overrated. And I will do the same on my disc. This is a good time to pause, actually, and come back to our handle, which now is a little bit firm. And I'm going to go ahead and give it its shape before it gets any drier. I'm going to go ahead and cut off this area here and kind of get a sense of how long I want it to be. Less than probably this. And then I'm just going to go ahead. You can shape your handle however you want. I'm probably going for a nice little rectangle. I don't want to go all the way to top to bottom. I kind of just want to do exactly like this guy here. So probably something around here. This down some, because that is enormous. Unless you want to hold your mug with 2 hands. That looks like it'll probably be a decent handle. And now I want this to continue drying elsewhere because I want this to be almost leather hard when I attach it. So I've scored my base. I will apply some slip. It's okay to be liberal with the slit. You can always wipe excess off or smooth excess in. It's fine. And now I will flip my mug again, even though it does not like to do that. Center it. And now I want to press down a bit firm here without crushing anything, because I really want a good attachment. Hopefully I can pick it up and move it. Press down, pushing on the top. I'm grabbing the whole thing, but trying to disperse my pressure as evenly as possible around. This is downward pressure. I really want to push that in there. Okay? And now I'm going to come around the outside, and just like I did before, and smooth this all in. Pushing in and up at the same time. So, this is pretty rough on the outside, but it's connected. On the inside, I still got a pretty rough seam in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take the back of my paintbrush, and a rounded edge there, and just bring that all the way around the corner in there, since my big old sausage hands don't fit in there. Just want to make sure that clay gets smeared together. You can see that made a slight groove in there. But that's okay, because I can actually take that same paintbrush, just use some water, smooth that out. I'm also smoothing out any imperfections in here right now. Going over my vertical seam as well. Flip this guy over. So you can see that my foot is flaring out a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and give that a sponge. I'm going to leave a little bit of a foot, and that's fine. But I do want it to be nice and round so it's not sharp. I like a little foot, catches any runny glaze, or, you know, gives it a little flair. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to depress the center of my foot a little bit. I find that occasionally I get a little bit of warpage on these slabs. And if this thing either bows up even just a hair, it's not going to sit flat on the table, and then it's going to be really unusable at that point. So I just give it just like the slightest depression. And now I am going to let this dry quite a bit to about leather hard before I attach my handle. I'm going to watch my handle because I don't want that to get too dry. And I'll be back in about, I don't know, 30 minutes. and I'll attach a handle. Okay, alright guys, it's been about 15 to 20 minutes. This is still pretty soft, but it is firm enough for me to work with. I find that the wetter I attach my handle, the less likely it is to crack. But obviously when it's wet and I start pushing on it, there's a more likelihood of me, misshaping it or messing it up or leaving fingerprints. So, but if I wait till it's too firm, my handle might crack. So, you find a place that's good for you, a happy medium. Again, I'm going to find my seam. It's almost invisible, but I see where it is. And I'm going to go ahead and attach my handle right there on that seam. This is the time where I'm actually going to start to mess with my rim too. Right now, you can see I've got kind of a jagged edge there. It's very square. That is not going to feel good for drinking out of. So I'm going to start to round that out a little bit. I'm going to pinch those corners. And I'm going to start to sponge that as well. I find that the real trick to cleaning up hand-built work is sponging. And there are two stages when I like to sponge. One is leather hard, and the other is bone dry. So I'm going to give this a rough sponge, and I'm actually trying to get rid of a little bit of the texture at the top because I don't really want that on my drinking edge. This sponge is not very wet right now. I don't want to add a ton of moisture right now because I am about to attach my handle, and I don't want it to get real wet before I stick my handle in there. Also just looking at my profile shape, make sure it's straight on the sides, not like bowing anywhere. Again, a lazy Susan or a banding wheel is your friend here. You can see the handle is holding its shape now. Gonna dry fit that on there. It actually looks good. If it's not the right size, feel free to cut it to size. But that looks pretty good to me, actually. Yeah, maybe it sticks out a little far. I'll probably take a little bit off. Always cut less and cut again if you need to, because it's easier to cut more. It's harder to add. Now I'm gonna go ahead and notch these a little bit because the area they'll be connecting to is round. Okay, so I've notched this, and now I'm gonna go ahead and dry fit it on here again. Figure out exactly where I want it, make sure that it's vertical, and then I'm gonna go ahead and mark on my mug where I'm going to be sticking it. I go ahead and score the handle, top and bottom, and I will score my mug, top and bottom. Don't worry about over scoring because you'll be smoothing out around the outside of your attachment. Better to overscore than underscore. Get some slip. Put it on. Again, don't worry about overslip. You can wipe it away, smooth it in. Alright, let's go ahead and stick our handle on. So I start by just sticking it on there. Now I check it to see that it's vertical. And the other thing I do is I check for perpendicular. Alright, and now I'm going to go ahead and actually just shove it in. So I use my index finger underneath, my thumb on top, and I use some back pressure on the inside so I'm not warping. And I push in pretty hard. And I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. Get a higher vantage point. Push in pretty firmly here. Really want to squish that clay into there so that they're conjoined forever, for eternity and beyond. Now I'm going to check shape again, just adjusting the shape a little bit till I think it's clean. Got my hand in there, fits nicely. It'll be a 3-finger handle. I maybe want it to stick out a little bit more, so I'm just pushing down gently, bringing it together. And now I'm going to start to smooth in this area around my handle. Again, I'm just using the back of my needle tool, nice and round. Back of your paintbrush, anything round, work nicely here. Gonna get in here. You know, these are the areas that tend to crack, and I just find that a little bit more aggressive I am when I smear this in, the less chance of cracking. Pick this up gently. Again, my fingers don't fit in here in these little tight areas, which is why I'm using this tool for smoothing this out. I'm also going to use the paintbrush here again because it's a tight area. This is smooth things out quite a bit. I'll even smooth out the outside of my handle. There's a couple dings. Do some paintless dent removal there. And then the last thing I will do is come back to my rim again that I was rounding out. And now that I've attached my handle, I'll be a little bit more aggressive in smoothing out my rim. Get my sponge about medium damp. And I'm really just working on these sharp corners. Kind of just go over them with my fingers too. You know, when we throw, we get these nice smooth edges because all this water is running through our hands constantly over the surface of the piece. You can get the same nice smooth edges just constantly going back and forth with a wet sponge or wet fingers. You know, it leaves nice, clean, soft edges. And like I said, I like to give this a real nice sponge right now. And I might give it one more sponge when it's a firm leather hard. And definitely when it's bone dry, I give it a nice sponge. The rim is so important. It is the connection to your face. If you think about it, there's two areas, especially right here for the right-handers and right here for the left-handers. Check my profile again. I like it. It might be the cleanest mug I've ever hand-built. I know Eloise is gonna like it. She hates it when I leave my rustic touches on it. She thinks I'm being lazy. And I am. She's right. That's fine. That's fine. Alright. One final sponge at bone dry and she's ready to go, guys. The last thing is going to be drying considerations. Alright? Drying is like the most important thing for preventing cracking. You might hear people say you want it to dry slow. That's true. But what you really want is for it to dry evenly. I'm going to go ahead and place this onto a separate board for drying. I'm actually going to use one of my cardboard pieces here. I'm going to let this dry upside down. Because again, what I want is for this to dry evenly. Now I have extremities like a handle. That's going to want to dry faster than shrink faster and crack. Additionally, if I had this right side up, the bottom would want to dry slow and cause it to shrink slower and possibly crack. So that's why I've got it going upside down, and I'm going to gently covering it, making sure that the handle is specifically is very well covered. So it'll be loosely covered on this side, upside down, slightly covered over here. I'm going to leave it loose because I do want it to dry. I don't want it sitting on my shelf for a week or whatever. But I do want it gently loosely covered, and I'll watch it, and if one area tends to be drying faster than another, I'll make some adjustments on my plastic, and hopefully I'll just watch it and everything will dry evenly. If I do get some cracking in my handle, I will just sponge it real aggressively and try to wrap it a little bit tighter, and we'll go from there. Alright, happy making, guys.